Hello YouTube, Dave here again. I hope everybody had a great weekend. My weekend was filled with running games. I ran 3 different role-playing sessions between Saturday and Sunday. The 4 hours was the lowest amount of time that I spent running a session, so I had a 4.5 hour group that I ran Saturday from noon till about 4:30. After that I went to HFX Games around 5 to set up for a Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest video, or not video, a playtest adventure, which I'll do a video on later. And then Sunday from noon until 5 I ran my monthly Tomb of Annihilation group. So it was a very busy weekend, and what I'm here to do today is, obviously by the title and by what you can see on the screen, I want to talk about the Lost Mine of Phandelver group that I ran. So I had done a video kind of talking about their encounter with the Green Dragon Venomfang a few weeks ago, and it got a pretty positive response. So I thought that I might keep up with these videos, especially if anything sort of interesting or noteworthy happens. So when I last left this group off, they had just defeated Venomfang, the Green Dragon, and they had to figure out how they were going to deal with the dragon's horde. I didn't use the horde that was in the adventure, mainly because none of the items that were in there were overly useful for the party as a whole. Or were ones that they, were going to end up using, really. So I ended up rolling kind of randomly with the idea that I created Venomfang as like the magic item substitute, having like the I think it was a battle axe or hand axe hue in the adventure, which was kind of cool. But its big special thing is that if you're attacking things made out of wood or creatures made out of wood, you deal like extra damage or something like that. So it just wasn't. I don't think it was going to fit in too well with what this group was doing. So rather than that, I sort of rolled my own thing. And part of rolling the treasure using the guidelines in the DMG was to roll for the silver pieces, and it ended up being something like 11,000 silver pieces, which works out to about 1,000 gold. And I didn't have very much gold, like because of that. The dragon had this huge bed of coins basically that he was laying on, and to have predominantly silver to me just sort of made sense. It still worked out to about 1,000. Or 1,100 gold pieces, and there was like 100 or 200 gold in there as well, and some gems, stuff like that. But the characters just had no way to transport that kind of silver back to Phandelver. Also, as a side note, I can't remember if I had really mentioned it in the last video, because I think that was the first video that I talked about this group. But as a little bit of a recap, they started off making their way to Phandelver, where they discovered that Gundren Rockseeker and his companion Sildar Hallwinter were ambushed after they had left sort of before the party. The party was there to deliver a cart full of goods to a business in the town of Phandelver. So the characters went, they rescued Sildar out of the Cragmaw Caves, or whatever the name of it was there. The Cragmaw Hideout. And they made their way back into town. Not quite sure what to do. They were attacked by some red brands earlier, and if I didn't tell that full story about the initial encounter with the red brand ruffians, let me know in the comments, and I will definitely do a video about that. So I don't want to spoil things too much. Eventually, they cleared out the red brands and apprehended their leader, who was taken away to stand trial in Neverwinter. As repayment, though, for driving the red brands out, the player characters were given the title deed to Tressinger Manor, which was the dilapidated, rundown, almost falling apart mansion that the red brands were using as their hideout. So, like the cellar and all like the stuff in the basement was perfectly usable, but they gave them the manor, which is going to give the players a base of operations and the ability to sort of fix it up and sort of customize it however they want, which is something that I'll do probably in a later session, is let them actually like do a plan up of the manor and dress it and stuff like that. They started to do that a little bit in this adventure, so they trusted the silver to the druid, who had no real need for worldly possessions or wealth, so he was more than willing to watch over the items for the character, or watch over the silver for the characters as they went back to get a cart and a horse. So they, make their way back to town. They get this cart. They purchase a safe for their manor, which is in the process of being repaired. So they purchase a safe, get it delivered to the home, and make their way back with this cart. So they load up the cart with 11,000 silver pieces, and they make their way back to Phandelver. So the whole thing's take about 8 days, I think, total, to get everything sort of done. And with that, as they're making their way back, they're approached, or I guess you could say ambushed, although I don't think it was the most effective ambush, by a pair of ogres. And these ogres were just really bad hunters, and they were hungry, and they wanted to eat the party's horse. And the party just said absolutely not. They didn't want anything to happen to the horse. Partially because, they have like a ranger in the party, and the bard likes to talk to animals. But I think a large part of that also had to do with the fact that they just didn't want the horse to die because they needed it to get the money back to town. The battle with the ogres was over relatively quickly. The party handled themselves pretty well. I mean, they were 4th level by this point. And so they defeated the ogres, and the bard decided that he wanted to take the ogres' heads and use them as wall mounts in the manor. So dressing their base of operations up is already sort of starting. So they take that stuff back to town. But when they get back to town, they've got this huge cart, not a huge cart, but they have a cart that's just got this huge pile of silver pieces in it. So shortly after they just get inside the town, when they're approached by the contractor who is essentially organizing the repair of their manor, and wants to discuss the manner of payment for his people, as well as materials to fix the manor, because the manor is effectively effectively demolished. They have like the stone foundation, and that's pretty much it to go off of. So they had to put tarps and stuff over the holes in the roof and stuff like that. What the individual offered was to actually rebuild the outside walls out of stone and make it a little bit more durable, and just kind of put stone around the existing wooden frame, and then eventually they'll just tear out the wooden walls and replace it with stone. So and he strategically timed the discussion of payment for when they had a cart full of coins, so that really unless they pulled like the Mr. Burns when he was trying to negotiate with Homer, saying that he really doesn't have a lot of money to spare. I think that was for the bear Bobo, and all of a sudden you just hear like a coin fall from above, and just like the ceiling collapses, and just this huge pile of coins and jewelry and stuff lands on Mr. Burns, and he's like, "As you can see, this place is falling apart." So anyway, the players were like, "Okay, well, how much do you want?" And I think they arrived at, I think it was like 300 silver, or 3,000 silver pieces, so 300 gold, and that was to secure all the stone that they need, to hire the masons that they need, and to get sort of that outer shell, constructed. So they, gave them a whole bunch of, they had like the laborers come and form a bucket brigade, but instead of putting out a fire, they're just loading up the buckets with silver pieces, and making their way from there. So obviously a cart full of coins is going to draw a lot of attention. So shortly after they deal with the contractor, they get maybe like another 20 feet up the road, when they're approached by an elderly woman and this disheveled looking child who's dirty and all scruffy, and his clothes is kind of ripped and tattered, and can't afford shoes. And the woman explains that she runs the orphanage in town, and that she was hoping to sort of upgrade the orphanage and just purchase some of the things that they sorely need, and like medicine for the children. And at that point, the little kid just goes, and so without even saying anything, or without even going any further, because I had a lot longer of a pitch that I was going to do. The cleric in the party, who's effectively a mute character, doesn't really speak. But in addition to the silver pieces, there was also like 12 emeralds that they had recovered as well. And the emeralds were actually used by the Cult of the Dragon to try to, coax Venomfang into working for them, or working with them. And these gems were valuable. They were like 100 gold pieces each. And so without even saying anything, the cleric just reaches into the pouch, pulls out one of these gems, and gives it to the woman and the child. And they thank them, and they run off. After that, just a single human male makes his way. He's kind of like holding a hat, kind of up to his chest, and running his hands around the brim, kind of nervously. And I didn't even have to say anything, and the druid or the cleric just passed another one of these gems to him. So I was like, all right. So he just takes the gem and runs off. And so at this point, the player playing the bard is, can someone get that the gems away from the cleric and stop giving away all of our money? And then, like, as they make their way a little bit further, there's like a dozen people. Again, they're all sort of disheveled looking and look downtrodden and down on their luck. And they explain that they were left homeless after the last war, and they need money to sort of get their life back in line. And at this point, the players are starting to get a little bit suspicious, because all of these victims of society sort of thing were approaching them all at once. And so one of the players is like, he makes an insight check to see if these guys are being honest. And he rolls pretty high, and it's like, well, you notice that, like, first of all, there was really no last major war in this region that these people would have been around for. And one of them is wearing, like, fine silks, and like dressed very, very well, but has like a little bit of mud on his face. And they're like, so they're lying to us. It's like, oh yeah, they're trying to scam you. And it's like, you look down on the ground, not too far from where you kind of ran into these people, and you see like places where they just scooped out mud from the street to rub it all over themselves. So they're like, yeah, everybody just get out of here. Get out of here. We're not giving you any more money. And at that point, one of the players asked, it's like, does this town even have an orphanage? And I said, no, it doesn't. Any orphans, if there are any, are typically taken care of by the temple in town. And so it's like, so we got scammed. It's like, yeah, they do another investigate check, and it's like you realize that the old woman and the child was someone in a costume pretending to be the old lady, and the child was actually a halfling who's like 40 years old. So anyway, but they just let it go at that, and it was a funny experience, and they laughed, and they thought it was funny. So they get back to their manor, they deposit their money, and they have two objectives at this point in the adventure. So they still have to go to Agatha's lair. Agatha being a banshee that sort of inhabits or haunts Neverwinter Woods, because the local priestess wants to locate an individual, like a wizard, or at least some trace of him. And it was essentially repayment for the cleric raising the bard from the dead. So again, if I haven't told the story about the initial encounter with the red brands, please let me know. I think I did, but if I didn't, please let me know, because it's a great story. So they make their way, they speak with Agatha, they succeed their checks, and they get the information that they need. So now the only thing left is to go to Cragmaw Castle. The Cragmaw Castle, they were given the information by the druid after they defeated Venomfang. So they make their way to Cragmaw, and it's a ruined, sort of rundown castle. There's, it looks like it used to be like, I think it was like 7 towers that surrounded the structure of the castle, but most of them had just like crumbled, and you could see places where they crumbled so completely that you could use it, like you could use them as another entryway into the complex. And but you know, they had the ranger kind of try to stealth her way to like the front of the castle and see what they had there for entryways, defense, stuff like that. Because where they came, they didn't get to see the other entryways yet. They could just see sort of the front entrance with like the two towers, which were more or less intact, and then like the ruined entryway into the actual castle itself. So as she approached, unfortunately her stealth roll was not great, and you know, a pair of goblins in one of the towers spotted her, and they fired arrows at her, and she kind of retreated, and they wanted to figure out sort of what to do next. And so the warlock decided to he was going to try to disguise himself. So this warlock had actually lost his imp familiar to Venom Fang. Venom Fang ended up killing the imp, banishing it back to the Nine Hells. So in between getting the gold back and before they left for Cragmaw Castle, a new imp just sort of appeared, a gift from the Infernal Master that the warlock is getting his power from. And this imp, the other one was a bit more eager to please and willing to serve and sort of do, you know, whatever he thought would help the warlock out. This one's a bit more of a sarcastic jerk, and you know, not as willing to risk his own hide for the sake of, you know, of the warlock. But you know, he still typically will turn invisible and just kind of, you know, rest on the warlock's shoulders. But the warlock decided that he had his disguise kit and he really wanted to use it. So he decided he was going to disguise himself as he couldn't disguise himself as a goblin because of his height, but he could disguise himself as a hobgoblin. So he disguised himself as a hobgoblin and just strolls up to the castle. This is you know, like an hour or so later, and just kind of strolls up, and you know, nobody stops him. He's a hobgoblin after all, and he goes into the castle. So let me just bring up the Cragmaw Castle map here. So the entryway that well, I don't know why I want to keep calling him a sorcerer, that the warlock went up to was Area 1, and it was Area 3 where arrows had come at the ranger from. So the hobgoblin, quote unquote hobgoblin, makes his way into Area 3, and just, you know, sees the pair of goblins there. And it's at this point that I ask him if he speaks Goblin, and he just kind of had this look on his face like, "Oh, I didn't think this through, did I?" So it's like the goblins turn to you, they regard you, and they speak to you in a language that you don't understand. And he was like, he was trying to figure out what to do to salvage the situation, and it's like they keep sort of asking you, or they keep talking to you. Again, you don't understand the words that they're saying, but you think that they're repeating the same kind of phrase, and they're starting to look kind of concerned. So he was just like, you know, maybe I asked them to speak, if they could just speak to me in common, because I'm practicing my common. And he's like, no, that seems kind of stupid, so Burning Hands. And so he cast Burning Hands. And warlocks, their spells they get fewer of them, but they're automatically heightened to the highest level spell slot that they could possibly cast. So these poor 7 hit point goblins are just nailed with a like a 4d8 Burning Hands, because I think Burning Hands was d8s. 48 or 46. It's a lot. So they just get incinerated. And then at this point, the imp who was Not on the sorcerer or the I did it again. Not on the warlock's shoulders, or at least he didn't think he was. He just sort of turns visible and is just laughing. Is like, all they were asking is what they could do for you, and how they could help you. And he praised the warlock for his callousness and just obliterating these goblins. So they kind of went around and went to the other the tower on the opposite side, and something kind of similar happened again, where it was just just burning hands and killed them. But in this case, he was less trying to find diplomat. Oh no, sorry. Yes. So as it turns out, the imp could speak Goblin, or could understand Goblin, and was willing to translate. And so the imp turned invisible. That's right, the imp turned invisible, rested on the warlock's shoulders, and they went into the other tower, where there was another pair of goblin archers. So they speak in Goblin, and telepathically, because they communicate back and forth telepathically, the imp, or not the imp translates what they were saying. And again, it was something very similar. They're asking if everything was okay because they thought they heard a noise, and they saw an elf earlier that ran off, and just sort of asking about stuff like that. So the plan was for the imp to tell the warlock what to say in Goblin, like just basically to repeat these phrases to respond back, and he was going to try to line up his mouth movements with what his response should be. So it's like, all right, that's fine. Make a performance check in order to actually try to line this stuff up. And he did okay with the first one. The first one was actually convincing enough, even though he mispronounced a few things. It was okay enough that it was like, okay, the goblins sort of relaxed a little bit. And then they asked him something else. And the second time, unfortunately, his performance was way off. I think he rolled like a 2. And was not proficient in the skill. So it was like full on, like, 70s, 80s Godzilla movies. And they're horrible dubbing, and that's sort of what things look like. So he was just like, yeah, this isn't going well. Burning hands. And used up his other spell slot. So the party just sort of, they make their way through the rest of Cragmaw Castle. Not a lot of more eventful stuff sort of happened. They encountered the Goblin Shrine, and they fought the goblins there. The Goblin leader that was leading the ceremony just kind of runs away. Draws them to the carrion crawler that's in the adventure. They dispatch that again pretty quickly, and they make their way to another section where there were a group of goblins, but there was a door that the goblins had barred from the outside. So a fight breaks out. So it was hobgoblins in this encounter, but they had barred this door, so that whatever was on the other side of the door can't get into the room where the hobgoblins were. So the party fights the hobgoblins. At the end of the first round, all of a sudden, roused by the sound of combat, they hear this thudding on this wooden door. And at the end of the round, the wooden door gets smashed and this hole gets punched through, and they see what looks like a bear arm reaching through. It's like bear paw with the claws and everything, but it's got feathers hanging off of the arm. And several of the players are, the entire group is relatively new to Dungeons and Dragons, but 2 of the players, the only times that they've played D&D were in games that I have run for them. So this was only like the 6th, I think, overall session that they had ever played of D&D. So, but even those individuals knew an owlbear when they saw its arm. So the fight breaks out. The hobgoblins are defeated, and they decide the owlbear smashes his way through the door effectively. The only thing that's kind of stopping him is the door is still kind of barred and barricaded. So even though he started to smash open the door, he still wasn't out. So the bard has speak with animals as one of his abilities, one of his spells. So he casts that because it allows you to communicate with beasts. So he casts speak with animals, and speaks with the owlbear. And the owlbear, I decided to make the owlbear a juvenile one because they were trying the goblins were trying to domesticate it. So he was a bit smaller. You know, this was the mini that I used, but I've got other larger owlbear figures. So I just basically said, you know, or the owlbear communicates, but he's very kind of like childlike in his voice and how he conducts himself. And basically, the owlbear was just scared. You know, he was taken from his family, and you know, wants to go back. And the bard's like, because they kind of want their own owlbear. So he's like, well, you know, will you come with us, and we'll see if we can find your parent, we can find your family. So the owlbear was like, you know, he made a diplomacy check, and he rolled well. So being able to speak with the owlbear was like, yes, you know, I'll follow you if I can get home. So they let the owlbear out, and the owlbear's like, you know, I'm hungry. Is it okay if I eat something? And you know, he was, I played him off as like this cute, innocent, you know, childlike, you know, thing. And you know, whenever he looked up, his eyes were like the big, sort of like wobbly, watery eyes that, you know, you see in like animes when something's trying to be adorable, like the sparkling and everything. So they're like, yeah, you know, we'll get you something to eat. And the owlbear just walks over to the hobgoblin. It just starts ripping it to shreds, you know, pulling out its guts, you know, just tearing, you know, hunks of meat off of it, and just like covering itself in the hobgoblin's blood. And it was just like this huge sort of like 180 shift from what he was like before. But you know, the player still found him adorable. And after that, he ate both the hobgoblins, and then his tummy was so full that he fell asleep, and he was like, you know, dreaming that he was running and something like that, because you could see like his foot kicking out. And then at one point he let out like an owlbear fart. And the group decided to leave him there, clear the room, and they went to basically the final encounter. They found their way to the final encounter of the castle, which was where King Gorel, I think his name was. He was a bugbear who had a pet wolf, kind of similar to Clark in those regards, except he had, you know, more hit points, stuff like that. And in this room there was also a female dark elf that was talking with the king, the bugbear king. And beneath this table that was in the room was the battered, severely beaten, unconscious body of Gundren the Rockseeker. So the players, they basically get into the fight, and they handle themselves pretty well. King Gorel, I gave him a battle axe, or a great axe, instead of the Morning Star, just to make him line up with the miniature that I was using, and at the same time reducing his armor. So just because there's a possibility that the players may only be 3rd level by the time they encountered him, I got them up to 4th level based off the fact that they, you know, fully defeated the dragon and some of the other stuff that they did. So I gave him a weapon that just sort of dealt more damage. And so it was a quick fight, but it was still sort of a tough one for the group. And when they defeated the Drow's body kind of just like warped, and all the like armor and stuff kind of just melded into this kind of like grayish, bluish, you know, like just rubbery, fleshy body with like a featureless head. So the female Drow was a doppelganger, and so they defeated everybody. They rescued Gundren, and that's basically where I left things off. So they were still in the castle. They had just rescued Gundren, and we kind of had to wrap things up at that point because I was about 20 minutes away from having to go to another game session that I was running somewhere else. So anyway, that's sort of what happened there. So they rescued the dwarf, they made an owlbear friend, and they got fleeced by quite a few people in the town of Phandelver. But overall, it was a really fun session. Everybody really enjoyed themselves. So anyway, I just want to thank you guys for watching. And again, if you want me to continue with these stories, just let me know. And if I hadn't told the story of the encounter with the Red Brands prior to like the group going to Thunder Tree, please let me know, because that was, in my opinion, that was a pretty funny story as well. So anyway, thank you guys again very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time. Take care.